Each year, more than 46 million Americans will seek emergency room treatment for an accidental injury, most of which are preventable. So, what are your risks, and who can you trust to protect you? This is Safety Matters with Russ Kenzior.
This is America's slip and fall guy, Russ Kenzior.
And this is Tony B.
Welcome to Safety Matters.
Welcome, welcome.
Got a lot to talk about today. Going to have some interesting interviews and a lot of news regarding safety.
Safety Matters in the news.
What's in the news today?
Well, we always start with what?
Coronavirus.
Did you know that Dr. Fauci gave an interview not that long ago? And the headline of this story is entitled, Americans Can Go to Theaters Once a Vaccine Has Existed for Almost a Year. Duke University Margolis Center for Health Policy Director Dr. Mark McClellan says that a vaccine may be available as soon as October this month, even on emergency approval, but would still require that it show that it actually works and that it wasn't released too fast. And some people are concerned about that, Tony. They're afraid that, hey, if you hurry up the vaccine, it may not be ready, may not really work. But Dr. Fauci, Anthony Fauci, director of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, believes, and I'm quoting now, that Americans will be able to sit in theaters, movie theaters, again, once a coronavirus vaccine has existed for almost a year. Now, I'm not certain where this comes from. Fauci was responding to a question from actress Jennifer Garner about when Americans can expect to return to theaters during an interview posted on Garner's Instagram page on Thursday. So you basically have a Hollywood actress asking the head of infectious disease, hey, when can we start making movies? Because, Hollywood's not making movies. And when can folks go to a movie theater to watch it? And I quote again, I think it's going to be a combination of a vaccine that has been around for almost a year and good public health measures, Fauci said. I would think by the time we get to the end of 2021, maybe even the middle of 2021. He added that if the U.S. gets a, quote, knockout vaccine that's 85 to 90% effective, and just about everybody gets vaccinated, society will have a degree of immunity that allows the general public to walk into a theater without masks and feel comfortable, and that they're not going to have a high level of risk catching the COVID-19 coronavirus. Now, what makes movie theaters different than like an airplane? I mean, I can get on an airplane, right?
Pretty much the same.
Sit next to somebody.
Right.
Maybe the middle seat's open, but nonetheless, I'm in very close proximity. I'm on the plane for hours. Going to be in a movie theater for hours. I mean, kind of help me here, Tony.
Yeah, I think it's actually better inside a theater because, by law or by code, the air conditioning systems have a maximizer, which allows, 10 to 20% of fresh air. So you are getting a recycling of air inside the space, where in a plane, you don't.
Well, Fauci also went on, and I'm reading, and this is a story put out by Audrey Conklin. It was published on foxbusiness.com. But Dr. Fauci also clarified that some theories about catching COVID-19 are based on earlier studies saying that people don't really need to worry too much about contracting the virus through inanimate objects, such as groceries and packages, that people do not need to wear masks outside when they are very far away from others. Now, again, follow the bouncing ball. Where are we? I mean, masks good, masks not good. But what's interesting is that he said that there's a very, very people don't need to, and I'm quoting, people don't need to worry too much about contracting the virus through inanimate objects such as groceries and packages. Okay? So, CleanLink puts out a study the same week entitled Reporters' Test of Surfaces Yields Interesting Results. Broadcast journalist Jeff Platt traveled throughout California's Kern County swiping surface in grocery stores, post office, gas station, and an airport in search of COVID-19. In all, he tested 25 surfaces using a swab kit from Phalangens. That's a manufacturer. According to the company's co-owner, the kit was created to allow any person to test the effectiveness of their safety and cleaning protocol. So this is kind of a do-it-yourself test. The self-check kiosk, armrest, luggage carousel, spots on the men's restroom were all tested at the airport, each coming back negative for COVID-19. The P.O. boxes and the floor at the post office checked out fine. You did the gas station pump pad where you put your credit card in, the PIN, and that came back negative. More than a dozen surfaces across the grocery stores were tested, with one test coming back with a positive result. And what do you think that would be?
The milk area, dairy products.
The bulk bin for dried beans. Now, this is exactly contradictory to what Dr. Fauci said, where we don't have to worry about, and I'm quoting, groceries and packages. But yet when a reporter, not a scientist, with a do-it-yourself tester went into the grocery store, he actually found the presence of COVID-19 on the loose stored beans in the display. So somebody was touching the beans and coronavirus on the beans. Now, I don't know if there's enough coronavirus on the beans to make a big difference, because you need a certain level of the virus to actually contract the disease.
So that's dried beans, not pork and beans?
Dried beans. So I'm confused, but not surprised. Again, I don't understand why it would take a year to have to go back to a movie. What makes movie theaters different? I mean, they can sanitize the seats, right? I mean, it's like everything else.
And were there any studies done?
Who knows? You never get the right answer. But Dr. Ngozi Ezike, she's the head of Safety and Health, Public Health, Department of Public Health for the state of Illinois. And she was interviewed and gave an interesting interview about the state of Illinois. This is from NBC Chicago, where it says Dr. Ngozi Ezike, Director of Illinois Department of Public Health, dismissed claims that the state is overstating the number of coronavirus-related deaths amid the ongoing pandemic, saying that only deaths of patients with laboratory-confirmed cases of the virus have been counted in the, quote, official tally. Not certain what that means. Is there an unofficial tally? During the Daily Press statement Tuesday, Ezeke said that she has heard concerns about the methods the state is using to report coronavirus deaths, and assured residents that the state is working to make sure that their accounts are as accurate as possible. She went on to say that the state is being careful to make sure to weed out the deaths where a patient had COVID-19, but died in a manner completely detached from the virus, such as a gunshot wound, motor vehicle crashes, etc. So she's talking about public safety and how COVID is being recorded. But let me play for you the audio.
Let's hear it.
Of her interview, okay, of the interview.
I have a question from a colleague. Michelle Gallardo from ABC7 wants to know, earlier this week, the state reported the death of a teenager in Cook County. Are you familiar with this case? If so, is this the state's first teenage death? And can you tell us if the teenager in question had underlying conditions?
I don't have that information at my disposal at this time. I know we have had people of all age groups die. I just want to be clear in terms of the definition of people dying of COVID. So the case definition is very simplistic. It means at the time of death, it was a COVID positive diagnosis. So that means that if you were in hospice and had already been given, a few weeks to live, and then you also were found to have COVID, that would be counted as a COVID death. It means that even if you died of a clear alternate cause, but you had COVID at the same time, it's still listed as a COVID death. So everyone who's listed as a COVID death doesn't mean that that was the cause of the death, but they had COVID at the time of death. I hope that's helpful.
I hope that's helpful.
Wow.
That our official data is clearly way off the mark. I mean, she went on, actually, if you listen to the rest of the interview, talking about a young man, in fact, that was the question, who came into the hospital as a result of a motor cycle crash, and he died. And then he tested positive for coronavirus, and they actually
they counted it.
They counted it. Now, the first question I ask is why would they even test a guy that's coming in from a motorcycle accident for COVID? I mean, he's obviously been hurt in a motorcycle accident. But so far, Illinois has reported, and this is a week or so old, 3,601 deaths related to the virus since the pandemic began. The state reported 144 additional deaths, and that reflects about a 4.3% of confirmed COVID-19 cases resulting in death. So the numbers are misleading. At the end of the day, that's kind of where we are.
Safety Matters with Russ Kenzier will be right back.
Welcome back to Safety Matters. We're going to spend a little bit of time talking today about fire extinguishers. Tony, do you have a fire extinguisher?
Yes, I do.
In your home?
Yes, I do.
How about your car?
No.
Why not?
I don't know. I never thought I needed one.
Well, most people.
I have one in my truck.
Most people feel they don't need
I have actually 5 in my truck.
5. So you're really well prepared. You know, I use the analogy. It's like a gun. People say, why would you ever need a gun? I said, well, it's like a fire extinguisher. I said, you hope you never need it, right? But you're glad you got it when you need it.
That's right.
So we're going to talk a little bit about fire extinguishers. There's different types of fire extinguishers. They work on different types of surfaces. You ever been to a like a hibachi sushi place?
Yes.
And they get that big fire off the grill.
Right.
That's an oil fire. That's a kitchen fire.
Gotcha.
And the reason they get that big flame is when they put water on the oil.
Right.
So do not put water on a fire in your kitchen. So if you have a pot or pan that ignites, catches on fire, don't throw water on it because you'll feel you're at the hibachi sushi place. But there's 5 classes of fire extinguishers. There's A, B, C, D, K, and they're all different. They work for different surfaces. For example, a Class A fire is a combustible solid, wood, paper. So if you have a wood or paper fire, you use a Class A fire extinguisher. Class B fire extinguishers work well on flammable liquids or gas. Class C is energized electrical fires. Remember, you don't want to use a fire extinguisher that has water on an electrical fire because water is a conductor. So you can actually electrocute yourself or somebody else as an igniter. And you're right. There are different types of fire extinguishers, and the most common is the ABC, and they work on ABC.
That's right.
There's a Class D, which I don't think anybody would ever come in contact with. That's a metallic fire, titanium, zirconium, magnesium.
Yeah, they're more industrial.
Yeah, maybe if you're in a Tesla, that might be happy. And a Class K, that's cooking fires, animal, vegetable oils, fats, that kind of thing.
All restaurants.
Yeah, so we would say to our audience, number one, make sure you have a fire extinguisher. And you have one in your car, and you have several within your home, including your garage. Why? Because you may need it. So if you have a fire extinguisher in your garage, you're going to need one that would extinguish a fire that may be related to automotive fluids. Right? So use the right type of fire extinguisher for the right type of application. Same thing for your home or your car. And make sure your fire extinguisher is charged. It's got a little gauge on it that tells you low pressure, or should be in that little green zone. If you look at the arrow, it has a little green zone. Make sure it's in there. It's amazing how many people have a fire extinguisher. I see this a lot on boating injuries, where a boat will catch fire and they'll go to the fire extinguisher that they had on the boat for 7 years, and it's totally discharged.
Right. They do have a limited time of use.
That's right. They have almost an expiration date.
That's right.
So make sure if you are boating, you have a car, garage, home, that you have a fire extinguisher. In fact, just a few weeks ago, we brought Jim Pauly on the show at the National Fire Protection Association. Could have asked him these questions, but this is simple stuff. It's affordable. You can pick them up at your local home improvement store, grocery store, anywhere you go, but make sure you got a fire extinguisher. We're going to be having an interview here with Beth Van Duyne. She's the Republican candidate running for Texas 24 for the congressional seat that is being opened by the current Congressman Kenny Marchant, who's retiring. And public safety is something that we spoke about last week with 2 of the South Lake City Council people, and we're just going to carry that theme along into a national arena. When we are speaking with our elected officials, those who are running for state, local, or federal positions, we need to ask the right questions.
Yeah, we want to know what the safety part of this is.
Well, safety is number one. In fact, as we talked about last week with the other guests from South Lake, safety is the number one issue for all candidates. I mean, the American people are not feeling particularly safe right now, whether it be coronavirus, whether it be protests, riots, police. I mean, there's so many different aspects of public safety that are really making most, if not all, Americans a bit concerned. They're scared. People are scared. They don't know what to do. And we want to cover this subject. We are all about safety. This is a show that's all about safety, and in this case, public safety. So we're going to be bringing, in the next segment, Beth Van Duyne onto the show to talk about public safety, given its level of importance.
Now, we invited both sides, right?
We did. We invited her opponent, and she never responded to our invitation.
Safety Matters with Russ Kenzier will be right back.
Welcome back to the show. This is Russ Kenzier, joined by my producer, Tony.
Hello.
And we are going to be interviewing a candidate for Texas Congressional District number 24, Beth Van Duyne. Beth, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Your opponents were invited, but chose not to participate. So we're going to ask you some questions about public safety. Right now, everybody, it seems, at least all the polls are showing that the number one issue that most Americans are concerned about is safety, public safety, their personal safety, their health, coronavirus, everything kind of bundled up in one big, nice bow tie, public safety. So we're going to ask you a little bit about that. And for example, everything in safety seems to be politicized. If you wear a mask, you're perceived to be, a liberal Democrat. If you don't wear a mask, you're a right-wing conservative. And I don't know. Look, maybe. But it's been so politicized that even wearing a mask now puts people in a position that they don't want to be. You want to be labeled. But people are confused, Beth. They're troubled. They're scared. They don't know what to do. They look to their leaders for information, for advice, for direction. And sadly, not only, in my view, are they not getting it, but it appears in some cases that many of our federally elected officials are actually encouraging this form of dissent or confusion. It's almost like there's a will to keep people in this country scared. I don't know if you've heard that from anybody you've been speaking with.
No, I have. I have heard that. I mean, it's right before an election, a major election, and you have a lot of feelings, strong feelings on both sides. And it seems like that is a motivating factor that you hear coming out of a lot of politicians' mouths. But, to your point about safety and it being important, I think, that has been something as a local elected official. I served on the city council in Irving for 6 years. I was mayor of Irving for 6 years, and that was a focus of ours. And it was interesting because at that point in time, it was not politicized. I had people on that city council I absolutely did not agree with on a number of things. Personality conflicts, but one thing that we all agreed on was public safety was paramount. And, as a result, we supported our police and we worked with our police. And, when we had outside activists that came into our city, what we were amazed to find is because our police had been out in the community and we had supported, advocated, championed so many different programs that got them out there that earned, trust and respect, mutual trust and respect and bridges of relationships. That when we had outside activists come in and attack our police department, not only did we as elected officials support the job that they were doing, but so did our citizens. And in fact, we had a program that was called Shop Talk. It got our police officers into Black-owned businesses, and they got to know the owners, they got to know the clients, and they went every month. And every quarter we had a big luncheon. And so the city manager would be there, the chief of police would be there, some of the other officers. And a few months ago I was talking to the city manager and he said that they had one of their quarterly luncheons. And there was two Black business owners in Irving who came in wearing Black Lives Matter t-shirts. And neither one of them were really didn't know how the luncheon was going to go, but both of the men stood up, thanked our police department, thanked our city leaders, and thanked our police chief for running such a fantastic organization in a department. And he said if more departments were run like the Irving Police Department across the country, then we would have no problems.
It's a very good point. Taking a stand makes you a target.
No, without a doubt, yeah.
It's really easy, and we find it so often in our elected officials, state, local, federal, where kind of stay in the middle, stay between the lines, don't create any conflict, everything's fine, and then all the wheels fall off and we're in a crisis, and we are in a crisis. Our country's in a crisis, many crises, and it's an election year, as you noted. You're running for an open seat, and so it's an interesting time. And this is probably a time where, more than ever, we need strong leadership. We need direction. We need decisive leadership, my opinion. And I think most of the voters would agree, again, regardless of party. But what role do you think, as a member of Congress, if you're elected, that you would play, that our Congress as a whole needs to play in establishing and maybe more importantly, improving public safety?
Well, I think those best practices that I learned firsthand, pragmatically, as a municipal, local elected official, I think we could take those best practices across the country. I think more so than, to your point about having a strong voice, nobody forces you to run for these positions. It's difficult, to run a campaign. You get out there, you put yourself out there, realizing that you're going to be criticized. But so often than not, we see people, once they get elected, go up there and just be intimidated. And you can't allow that to happen. If you're going up there and you're telling people that you are going to be their voice, whether or not that's at City Hall, whether or not that's the state capitol, or whether or not that's in D.C., you need to represent your district there. And you need to do it very, very strongly, very, very vocally, and very articulated. And I think we tend to lose that a lot of times as local elected officials. And I'll give you an example. In the city of Irving, early on, we were working with our police department, and we had a relationship with Immigrations and Customs Enforcement. And we actually were looking at, doing what a lot of cities are not doing now, which is actually targeting criminal activity. And we had a program, as our CAP 24/7 program, where we worked with ICE. We arrested individuals committing crime. If they were found to be in the country illegally, they were detained. ICE came. And if they were found not to be here legally, they were deported. And the result in the city of Irving was we became the 5th safest city in the country, and we had 9 years of the lowest crime rate in our city's history. And we were intimidated. We had outside activists. CNN came in, New York Times came in, and they tried to call us every label in the book that you see being thrown out now. But the fact is that we didn't back down, because we realized what we were doing was in the best interest of our citizens, was in the best interest of our residents in this community. And though we were threatened that people were going to move out, businesses were going to leave, nobody was going to want to do business with our city. The fact is, at that time, because people want to live in safe communities, because businesses want to be located in safe communities, we had the fastest growing economy in our city's history, and we had a population growth that we we had a hard time keeping up with. So it was the exact opposite of what we were threatened with. People want to live in safe communities.
Well, you have a track record.
Yeah.
And that, I also think, separates you from your opponents. You've actually done things, established public policy, made decisions that affected the citizens of Irving, and that would be represented, assumably, in Texas 24 as a congressman. And Texas 24 has been devastated by the coronavirus. Every district has. Economically, every community's just been suffering. They're still suffering. There's been the shutdowns. A lot of this came from CDC, National Institutes of Health. We have government agencies that 99 out of 100 of our listeners have no idea what any of these organizations do. They know they're out there, but they don't really know what they do. But as a potential member of Congress, how would you work with those agencies? What's the checks and balances? How do you know that just because the head of the agency says I recommend we do that? This isn't my experience working with CDC and OSHA and all of them. There's a large group of dissent that you never really hear. You just get the leader's decision, and that oftentimes becomes the root for the politicizing the issue. But how would you, as a member of Congress, weigh the information you're getting from regulatory agencies into establishing public policy?
Well, we had talked about this earlier, but it's all about asking the right questions. And in addition to being a municipal elected official, I also worked for the Trump administration. I worked under Secretary Carson at HUD inside the belly of the beast. And so I know what it is like, because, you have a lot of bureaucrats there, the lifelong career bureaucrats that really, they know their job. This is the way they're going to do it. It doesn't matter who is the political person that's appointed. This is the way I've always done it. This is the way we're going to do it. And they know they can wait you out. So I think it's having that kind of, one, knowledge beforehand when you get up there, you're going to have to make a difference. Two, knowing that a lot of times you have to set up time limits and it has to be pushed. But it's also knowing the question, not, hey, can we get this done? But, okay, this is what the goal that I want to see. Help me figure out how to get there.
Right.
And it's coming up with a plan that it's pragmatic, but it's also realistic. And a lot of times we don't do that.
Right. Well, there's a big issue regarding the police. You mentioned this a moment ago. Defend the police, to fund the police. And for some reason, I'm just shocked. I mean, I'm 60 years old. I've never, ever imagined living in a country where people would question defunding the police, actually eliminating law enforcement, as if somehow that's a solution. And I know that's a hot issue. That's a controversial issue, which, again, is amazing. But I would assume you're for defending the police. And
well, not only am I for, but yes. And this is just not because I'm running for Congress, but, go back and look at it on my social media or things that I've done, over the last decade. And yes, I absolutely am not in favor of defunding the police. I think we need more training. I think we need to set up a database, national database, so that those bad apples, don't go from department to department. But I have never met a police officer who wants to work alongside a bad police officer.
Right.
They end up being targeted, and now not only you seeing them targeted, but their families being targeted.
And that's just so unfair, because these are people who are truly public servants. I mean, look,
put their lives on the line every day.
Yeah, I mean, policemen, firemen. Imagine running into a burning building to save somebody's life who you don't even know.
Yeah.
I mean, these are truly public servants. And to take this initiative to aggressively want to detach them from our society, which is really what's going on, is alarming.
Yes.
Before we head into the break, one more question. There's a lot of these flash mobs kind of popping up. 200 people, 300 people show up, and they can pop up anywhere. Irving, here we are in South Lake, that can happen anywhere. A lot of city government officials are not certain how to respond. Our city, we had a couple of city council people on last week. They answered the same question that I'm asking you. How would you recommend we defuse that type of aggressive protesting that's going on, regardless of who the protesters are?
Yeah. Again, it's the community policing that goes into it beforehand. So you have to have been out and engaged in your businesses, in your neighborhoods, in your places of worship, in your schools before these things happen. It's preparation. If you wait until after something major happens and you haven't built that trust and mutual respect, you've already failed. And that's why I get really frustrated with mayors like Atlanta, who threw her police officers under the bus. The entire department she threw under the bus. Where was she as a leader, championing programs that would have helped those police officers? If you thought your department was truly as bad as you described it, where were you? You are the leader in that city. It is up to you. It is your responsibility to make sure that it is run in such a way that mutual respect is built. And if you're not, then that is failed leadership. It's not a failed department. Understood.
The last question, just a real quick follow-up, is, you mentioned Atlanta. It seems to be a big city problem.
Yeah.
I mean, you see it as a big city problem or a...
Well, I think if you look overall about where you have seen failings, people talk about systemic racism. They talk about the BLM movement. And it's not systemic racism that I see. It is consistent systemic failures of public policy that has led into that. All of these entitlement programs that we've created have not led to less poverty, but to more poverty, to generational poverty. And I think what we need to do is stop looking at ways of creating more, systemic poverty, and looking at ways of being able to create generational wealth. That's where our policy should be. But in large urban cities, that is where your minority base is most hurt. Those policies have not helped. They've made them more dependent on the government and less able to independently succeed.
You're listening to Safety Matters with Russ Kenzier.
Welcome back to Safety Matters. I've been interviewing Beth Van Duyne, who is a candidate for Texas 24, running for the open seat. One question that comes up a lot is really related to control, state control, local control, national control. It seems like a lot of elected officials have an opinion one way or the other. As a Texan, Texans generally like to talk about local control, school boards, right, city. What's your view of district control?
Well, I am running against an opponent who has talked about federal government control and basically wanting every part of our life to be controlled by the federal government and all local officials to just look to the federal government to tell them what to do. And when I was mayor, when I was on city council, that's like the last thing that you want. We never went to the federal government and said, hey, can you solve this issue in this neighborhood for us? We live here. Our kids go to school here. My job is to go out in the community and talk to people in their neighborhoods, in their places of worship, in their businesses, and find out what their needs are and what they want. Nobody from D.C. is doing that. And the same kind of solutions that you're going to give to somebody in California or New York is not necessarily, and I'll tell you probably most of the time, not going to be appropriate for what we need here. So I think local leaders need to step up. They need to realize that nobody forces them to run these positions, and if they are going to run for them and they actually get elected, their job is to solve those problems, to work with members of their community, to work with members of their department, to work with the state and the federal government where necessary, but the buck stops there. And I never looked to the federal government because you're in the communities. And I think when we start handing over control of our health care, when we start handing control over our education to the federal government, we are completely missing the bus. This is Texas. That is not what we want.
Now, you have some experience. You worked with Secretary Ben Carson.
I did. Wonderful man.
Housing and Urban Development. Tell us a little bit about that experience.
Well, we have tried thinking outside the box. One of the things I loved about him when I first interviewed with him early on was he said, we need to change our focus. We need to stop looking at our success as by the number of people we get in our programs and start judging our success by the people that we graduate out of our programs. Talking about empowering people, giving them tools to be able to succeed on their own, giving them opportunities to be able to create generational wealth. We did this rental reform, for example, and one of the things that he wanted to do was if people live in public housing, every month put an amount of money into escrow. That if they take care of their properties, if they learn how to take care of their homes, if they're not destroying the places that they live, when they leave public housing, they actually have money to be able to put down payment on a home. And we found that people who actually had homes had almost 500 times the value, the wealth that people who rented had. And you start thinking about that. That is wealth that accumulates that you can then put down to the next generation. You're passing that down. So you're breaking those cycles of poverty. Those are some of the things that we need. And, in the city of Irving, we were talking about crime earlier in our police. It's thinking outside the box. One of the things that we had done was looked at a neighborhood that we had put a lot of police officers and spent a lot of time and resources on. This neighborhood was full of crime. We had gangs, we had criminal activity, we had prostitution, sex trafficking, drugs sales, and it was right across the street from a middle school. And, you could put as many police officers there, but the crime still existed. What we ended up doing is working with our state and federal leaders to figure out how we could solve what the problem was, which is we had a bunch of empty homes that actually contributed to the crime. We bought those homes, we raised those homes, and we ended up building affordable housing. And we took this neighborhood from being one completely crime-ridden across the street from a middle school to now it's a thriving neighborhood representing hope and opportunity. It was not a police solution. It was a policy solution, but we saw 80% crime rate almost overnight there.
Economics plays a big role in poverty and safety.
Sure
if you look at some of the most underprivileged communities, higher rates of drug abuse, crime in general, and all that's really an economic factor. And it can be solved through leadership. I think it was Ronald Reagan who said we prefer to give people a hand up, not a hand out, and empower them. Yeah. And that's an important perspective that not everybody has. There are some people that really, elected officials that frankly don't mind keeping people impoverished.
And I don't think we want that. I think, most Americans, people come here from around the world. They fight to get here because they realize if you work hard, you can succeed. Right. And our policy should be representative of that. You don't want to put anybody in a position that they can't get out of.
Right.
So offering tools of training, having good schools, having kids be able to make a choice of what school they go to, parents being able to make a choice of what school, which is in the best interest of their kids, getting kids back in school. Right? Yeah. That is a terrible problem that we have right now, but it is giving individuals the freedom and the opportunities.
The American dream.
Yes, absolutely. And it should be alive and well. And I'm seeing folks on the other side of the aisle that are embarrassed about the American dream and apologizing for the American dream and actually seemingly fighting it. And I think you're seeing Republicans and others that are not on, on the radical left that are saying, no, this is a country worth fighting for.
Amen.
We have had ideals here, best country in the world, and we need to fight for it.
Let's shift gears a little bit. Public safety comes in all shapes and sizes. Our infrastructure needs. We have crumbling roads and highways and bridges. We were told years ago under the Obama administration that there were these shovel-ready jobs. I think we invested $1 trillion. And most people say, where did it go? I mean, how do you propose solving some of our deteriorating infrastructure requirements?
That's a great question. I'll tell you, I think it's one of the biggest failures that we've seen in the last 2 years of Congress is not passing an infrastructure bill. We saw a whole class of new Democrat Congress members that got elected, during their campaign say we were going to be new and we're going to focus on what's important to American people. Well, the fact is if they had passed an infrastructure bill, those essential jobs could have been fulfilled in the last 6 months while we have had, the COVID scare and we've shut down the economy. These would have been good paying jobs that would have rebuilt, major parts of our infrastructure. That didn't happen. I look at what's going on in District 24. One of the number one economic drivers in this district is DFW Airport. They've got about $10 billion of infrastructure improvements that they need that has to happen. Wastewater, making sure that when it floods, and often we have heavy rains, planes can still take off and land. And we haven't had that bill that's been passed. You start thinking about our roadways and the major connection that goes through Texas on this. But it's not just infrastructure, but it's also manufacturing. And I think we need to rethink about when we think infrastructure to manufacturing jobs. Because if anything that we have learned over the last 6 months is how vulnerable we are to having those jobs over in China and not having the ability to have our PPEs here, looking at pharmaceutical drugs that are a necessity to people and not having them in this country, but having to rely on a dictatorship like China for them. So if we can do what Trump and this administration has tried to do is bring those manufacturing jobs back to America, but specifically we have areas with technology that's not a huge footprint that we can actually start building them in this district and looking at that as part of our infrastructure is jobs, but specifically manufacturing jobs. And you think for every manufacturing job that you add, it's a 3-to-1 ratio of how that attracts other jobs within our community and within this district. That is impactful. Those are the focuses that we can have. And we can have these political debates where, it sounds sexy to say such and such and blame, but actually policy work is hard. You have to think, you have to sit down, you have to strategize, and you got to work with everybody. And I just don't see a whole lot of that happening in D.C. today.
No, I think you speak for most people. Troubled, concerned, disappointed, disillusioned. We see our young people today very, I don't know if I would say they're anti-American, but many people don't like this country. And I grew up in a different time and place. I love my country. And we're seeing the generational change. And when we talk about safety, public safety, it comes, again, in all different shapes and sizes. As a member of Congress, you're going to have oversight over the military. And we have a number of military bases, Air Force, the largest Army base in the country, Fort Hood, not in your district, but part of the fabric of our society, of our culture of Texas. We have a lot of veterans here. Sadly, the military is facing a ever-growing crisis of suicides.
Yeah.
It seems like almost every time you turn on the television, you hear about a young soldier committing suicide or being killed at a base. And I think we have a record number this year. How would you address that? I mean, what steps would you take as a member of Congress to work within the military infrastructure to turn the tide on on that problem of suicides?
I mean, suicide, you're saying because of COVID actually affecting a lot of keeping kids out of school, you're saying increased number of suicides, keeping people, away from others. As we stay home, we're not socializing. You're seeing increases in suicides across the board. Specifically with the military, I think the Trump administration's focus on the VA and restructuring of the VA to make sure that people have more opportunities and more choices for health care. Mental health is going to be number one in that. But expanding choices, not limiting choices. And what I see on the other side of the aisle is these choices have been struck down. When we talk about Obamacare, you've got one size fits all federal government control of your health care. I think that's the exact opposite of what we need to do. A focus on mental health, but about expanding opportunities that fit your needs. So if you want to have more opportunities within your list of physicians, if you have already built a relationship with a doctor, if it's a mental health physician that you want to continue seeing, you can pick and choose. Private health care, is basically we have 600,000 people who are on private healthcare systems right now. My opponent wants to get rid of that. She's all for affordable healthcare plan, which would strip those 600,000 people out of the plans that they're currently in and that they're enjoying. Now, we have to do a much better job, but public health and mental health is where we really need to start concentrating, because that affects, and if anything, we're going to see that this pandemic is going to put an exclamation point on those issues.
Sadly, I have to agree with you. This is the first time, Beth, I believe, that two women are running for Texas 24. I don't think there's ever been.
You never had a female representative at Texas 24
That's
before.
Right.
It's true.
And as a woman, as a person with your background and your experience, you grew up in a military family. Another crisis that's affecting the military, and it's been happening for a number of years, is military sexual assaults, both men and women. I mean, it's been a plague. The military academies have had to deal with this crisis. Sadly, I don't think they've done a very good job, just my opinion. How would you, as a female member of Congress, want to address military sexual assaults, whether it's in the full military or the academies?
That's an interesting question. I've never run, as a female candidate. I'm the only woman mayor that Irving has ever had, but I've never run as a female candidate. I've always said, vote for me because I've got a vision, because I'm strong, because I'm prepared, and because I have results and I'm the best candidate. But as a female candidate dealing with sexual assault and having experience with it and having worked, but also having personal experience with it, I think we would be more apt to ask questions that some of our male counterparts don't feel comfortable asking, and not accepting wash over, brush over answers, but really getting down to the heart of it. And I think it also makes us more sympathetic to the victims of sexual assault. Having a relationship with them beforehand where they feel like they can talk to you and open up, and knowing that you're just not going to brush it off. I think that's really important.
Well, I think it's important that you mentioned it. You have experience. You work for the women's shelter. I worked for a rape crisis center. Right.
I was the first student ever for the Cornell Advocates for Rape Education, and I wrote my honors dissertation on it. But it's teaching women to actually have a very strong voice, to have a strong backbone, and to not be embarrassed about that. And I look at what's happened with the hashtag #MeToo movement over the last several years, and it seems like it's put women in a position of victimhood. And, I wrote an article after Trump was elected, but during the inauguration, the next morning, I had my 17-year-old daughter in town, and we were leaving one of the hotels in D.C., and there was a woman wearing a sign that said, "I am scared." And I wrote a tweet on my way to the airport saying, I just saw you, and I didn't point out her name or anything like that. I just saw this woman, to her, I'm a woman. I'm fearless. I have a voice. I am not scared. And the reaction that I got out of that when I got out of the plane was, divisive. 50% loved it, 50% hated it. And I ended up writing an article about it, saying, look, we are strong. We are fierce. We are a force of nature to be dealt with. We need to get that message out to women. That, we can achieve anything that a man can. We deal with a lot more, and we need to stop apologizing for it, but we are not victims. We are strong. And I think that message has been lost over the last 50 years. Back in the 70s, it was, I am woman, hear me roar. And now it's like, oh, you have to take care of me. I think more women, young women, need to have strong female mentors. And when women are in positions of power and they can have a voice to stick up for other women, they need to do that. But how you do that is not by pushing men away. Men are very much a member of our society, members of our community, and it is embracing and having that mutual respect. But it's going to be everybody's voice. And when we start, just by virtue of a gender or a race, putting people into categories, we're losing.
How can people learn more about you?
My website, it's bethfortexas.com, and anybody is welcome to shoot me an email if they've got questions, beth@bethfortexas.com. But I'm out and about in my community. I have always been accessible. So we are going, my job, if I get elected, is going to be to represent District 24 in D.C., not to represent D.C. and District 24. And how you do that is you get out. You get out where people feel most comfortable. As a public servant, I don't have the privilege of being able to work from my couch. Right? You have to get out where people feel most comfortable. And we are block walking and talking to people. We are going to events. We are calling people. We're having business tours to understand what's happening with employees right now. We are having roundtables with physicians. We're having roundtables with educators saying, what do we need to open up the schools? But my job is to listen and then to represent what our community wants in D.C. and to fight for it.
I've been speaking with Beth Van Duyne, candidate for Texas 24, running for Congress. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.